right. We are creating from rest. That is our focus this year for both Erin and I. And so this is our monthly check-in to say, how are we doing with that? How are we keeping our eyes focused on Jesus and trusting his will with everything? And for Erin, that's looking like putting down a lot of stuff this year, having a Sabbath rest. And for me, it's looking like kind of scaling up, kind of adding in some more stuff. We are agreeing to meet with each other once a month to hold each other accountable, to talk through, to learn, and we're documenting as we go along in case it's helpful to those of you who are listening as well. Those of you who want to put aside the striving for perfection, the striving in our own power and our own might, and wanting to surrender this gifting and calling of writing to the Lord and trying to make sure that our will is aligned with it. So, Erin, let's start off with you. Let's talk about your last month. So these episodes are getting released a little bit later after they've been recorded. So we just finished up January. And so this was like your first full month of being on the Sabbath year. And so how has it gone for you so far?
Okay. So far it has been really good. First of all, I've been sleeping great,
Oh,
which is
really?
crazy because I'm usually not a good sleeper. And usually the middle of the night is when I do most of my writing. God and I kind of have this deal like, if you wake me up, I will get up and write the words. And I'm actually missing that because he hasn't woken me up. And meanwhile, I'm getting great sleep. So I'm feeling very rested, which is wonderful. But at the
That's
same time,
awesome.
it's kind of like this, I don't know, like I'm missing that, I don't know, that aspect of our
Mhm.
kind of writing relationship. It's weird to talk about having a writing relationship with God.
I think most of those of us who are writers understand what you're talking about. Like when you're in that creative space and you're just fully aware of the fact that God's gifted you with that creativity. Like, it's not from you. Like, there's some parts of you, but you know that this skill, this gift that you have really is from the Lord. And it's just, there's a humbling with it and just a sense of like gratitude, right? That you have for
Yeah.
it. And so I could see you missing it. I would miss it too.
Yeah. So other than that, kind of I would say three big things have happened this month for me. The first one was a big no. And I kind of knew that that was going to happen. And we sort of talked about this last week because my agent is pitching my book proposal right now to traditional publishers. And that's something new for me. And so I kind of knew that that might conflict a little bit with some things that I'm doing this year, which is
Hmm.
nothing. So I did have to do a big no this month on that front. And at first, when I had kind of gotten this email from her with a suggestion for a project, my first reaction was, well, no, because it's a Sabbath year.
Hmm.
And as I sat on it a little bit longer, I realized it's actually a no for other reasons that have nothing to do with the fact that it's a Sabbath year. And I don't think I would have been able to see those reasons if it weren't a Sabbath year,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
the
totally.
reason was no, not for the reason that it is a Sabbath year, but as a result of the fact that I'm Sabbathing this year.
Hmm.
It just wasn't the right project for me at this time.
Hmm.
And it wasn't the way that I wanted the message to go out.
Hmm.
And so at first I thought that no was really going to cost me in kind of a major, major way. And I was kind of having to trust God with that. And then um, he was just so faithful and so gracious. And in some conversations with her since then, um, we're really looking forward to where the direction of the way things are going. And it was just very surprising
Yeah.
to me, just to see that turn, and in all the conversations, I really felt just his going before me,
Mm.
and so that was really just a good confirmation that he's got
Right.
this under control. If he tells me to do this Sabbath here, then he's going to provide a way through it, and even if the answer had been no, and that had meant kind of a big end to a lot of things, then that would have been he would have gone before me in that as well.
Mhm.
I'm glad that isn't the way things are going, but he would have gone
Yeah.
before me there as well. So that was kind of the first big thing that happened this month. Um, the second big thing that happened this month is the 28-day challenge. So that is the project that's kind of a collaborative project that I have started before I knew this was gonna be a Sabbath year, and so God and I kinda had a
Little heart to heart.
we yeah, we had a heart to heart about it, and I'm moving forward in a different way with it than I would have before. And so, that project has started. Today is February 6th. So as of yesterday, we were 5 days into this daily devotional challenge, and the numbers, after a month of not checking any numbers at all, for this, since it is collaborative, I have to be in it every day and I need to
Mhm.
share updates and things like that. So I have been looking at the numbers because they're kind of, you can't be in the program working on the project and not see them. They're like right
Right
there in your
there.
face. And so the numbers are shockingly good, like
Mhm.
way beyond anything I could have wanted for this project or imagined for this project. And the temptation to look at
Mhm.
those numbers, to check way more than necessary, has been overwhelming.
Mhm.
And I'm struggling. And I'm kind of like, okay, God, I feel like this is a test I wasn't ready for this early in the year.
Mhm.
And it has me stepping back a little bit and realizing, okay, you've come a long way in a month, but you are not where you need to be. This is still so far. Do you need all 12 months? Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
you do. You need all 12 of these months to
Mhm.
break down these habits and things that have really taken over. And I was thinking of just the story of Jesus multiplying the loaves and the fishes. And so often I look at that story and think, we bring what we have, right?
Yeah.
And God does what he wants with it. And that's a beautiful picture. But today he was like, okay, did you see that little boy walking around like bragging that his lunch had become everybody's lunch? No, like that would be absurd,
Right.
right? Or was he just completely humbly grateful that he got to be part of something so incredible?
Right.
Jesus could have used anything. He could have turned the stones into bread. He did not need that little boy. He did
Mm.
not need the lunch. And so, while yes, I think we should bring what we have, he's just reminding me like, this is so not about you.
Mhm.
Quit looking at these numbers and thinking that somehow they make you more significant, that somehow they mean something other than what you already are in me. Just
Yeah.
because of who I am and what I've done for you. So, the struggle continues. Episode 2, the struggle continues. I am still learning, a lot of learning.
Aw.
And then the final thing that I've really been enjoying this month, and this is gonna sound so simple, but it has been life-changing, is reading the Bible for me. Just for
No, I
me.
totally get what you it's like, it's not homework, it's
It's
just
not, and
enjoyment, yeah.
like, even before it wasn't homework, but I've been writing in the Christian space for this is my 7th year now. Before that, I was in ministry as a
Mhm.
career for 8 years. Before that, I volunteered in ministry for as long as I can remember. So reading the Bible has always been like, yes, I love reading the Bible. Like, it's one of my favorite
Yeah.
things to do. But I also love seeing these connections that I get to share and like,
Yeah.
oh, this will be the perfect illustration. Oh, I love this verse. I can't wait to tie it with this story. And it's like constant connections that I can share, right?
Mhm.
Here's a great lesson for women in our culture today.
Yeah.
And it's just been so refreshing to read it just for me. And God is like highlighting verse after verse, things I've read so many times, and they're new
Yeah.
because he's not talking to anybody but me. It's just
Yeah.
between me and him, and, um, the conviction of just, "Erin, when was the last time you read my word and it was so convicting that it brought you to tears? It's been too long. It's been too long since you used this book for you, um, since you heard these stories about the Pharisees and realized they're not about the Pharisees. You are the Pharisee,
Mhm.
and walked away brokenhearted and wondering, God, can you really fix this? Is a year even long enough? Is it even possible for you to turn all this around? Realizing how far off my heart is in so many areas. And what I knew was a problem at the beginning of the year, I see as something much bigger. And I know it's something that I can't fix on my own. Um, and it's something that only he can fix. And so I've kind of hit the point in the year where I know somehow there's a moving forward, but I know it's not me.
Mm.
And so waiting on him to work and to do and to be faithful because he can do anything. And so I know that there's hope in that. Um, so I'm kind of waiting, anticipating what he has next. So those are the three things that I would say have kind of defined this month and my journey forward into the Sabbath year. But it's also good in the same way that I long for those times where God wakes me up in the middle of the night because he shows me things and it's like this beautiful communion with him.
Mhm.
That's what I'm experiencing now in my Bible reading time, but it's nothing to share, it's just for me.
Yeah.
And that's something really special that I think is developing in a new way that I didn't have before or I haven't had in a long time.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing all that. Thank you for opening up like that with us. It was interesting when you asked that question, like, is 12 months even enough time? Thankfully, we get our entire lives for God to do a renewing work on us, right? But what came to my mind was, I'm like, well, he rose from the dead in 3 days. Like he can bring you from the depths of, just walking kind of blinded and
Yeah.
kind of moving dead through the world, spiritually.
Yeah.
And he can kind of reawaken that however quickly he wants to. Um, but I love what you shared there about um that you had this intimacy with him in writing things to share, but now you're getting to share an intimacy with him just one on one. And I think that is such a gift. It really is. But I also think, as you were talking, what came to my mind, I too make connections about stuff all the time. I think that's what we're wired to do. I think that's really how God has wired us. Have you found that those like leaping to connections has slowed down a little bit? Are you still having them come to mind, or are you just kind of
So many connections.
oh, okay.
So many, but they're for me.
Okay.
I mean, it is like the Holy Spirit is like, and this is you, and this is you, and
Mm.
this is you, in a very uncomfortable way. It is a lot easier to write all these connections when your lesson is for somebody else.
Oh, for sure.
Not that I don't also learn from the lessons that I write
Mhm.
for others, but it is different when the Holy Spirit is just digging in.
I think maybe the difference is,
Oh,
like, when we see those connections and we're, like, excited because 'cause we're like, "Look at this awesome thing," or, "Look at how beautiful God is," and, like, "Look at that," like, and you're wanting to share with somebody because 'cause you're, like you're so excited about what you just found, but connections you're seeing are not things you're excited about, like, they're very
yeah,
uncomfortable and they're very real, and that's why they're just for you.
yeah, yeah. I know, and I thought about sharing some today, like, "I never saw this verse this way," or "I never saw this verse this way," and the more I thought about all the ones that have been making connections for me, the more I thought, hey, I don't think they're for anybody else.
Mhm.
Maybe later, but not right now. I
Yeah.
don't know that anybody else would get them in the same
Yeah.
way because
Makes me think of Mary about
yeah,
how she treasured these things and pondered these things, and then she didn't share them until later with
yeah,
I mean, she might have shared them with a few other people, but, like, where they were captured and put down for prosperity, didn't happen until much, much later. And
yeah,
so, kind of the same concept that maybe
yeah.
one day you'll share them. Yeah.
And as a writer, I think we tend to think, if I didn't share it, did it actually happen? Because we have to record everything.
Yes.
But yes, it did. It
Yeah.
did actually happen, and it does still make a difference,
Mm.
um, even if it's just for you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm. How beautiful. So did you
Oh, go ahead.
I had one more question for you as you're talking. So you're working still with the agent. I don't know that we talked through all this in the last episode, but I know that you have shared with me since then. But you have like turned off like you had made a decision, I'm turning these things off. Your shop is disabled on your store or on your
Yeah.
website. Um, are you still sending out like a weekly newsletter like devotion, or have you stopped that too?
So that I didn't really make a commitment one way or the other. I kind of let people know at the beginning of the year this might not come out as often as it has in the past. Right now, it's kind of been every other week. I think I just sent my third one of the year,
Okay.
um, which usually it would be, my sixth one. And I was considering like pulling some old stuff to send, just to have something kind of keep current.
Well, because we're told with online marketing and online businesses in the kind of the realm that we're in, that you need to be nurturing your audience. You can't just like ghost them. You can't just
Right.
like not email them because they'll
Yeah.
forget about you. So I'm sure that's probably in the back of your head a little bit.
It is a little bit. And part of it too is I love writing those devotions. It's like my favorite thing. And it has created in me a habit of looking for God in the everyday moments.
Hmm.
And I feel like a year away would have me stop looking because
Mm,
it's for me as much as it is for them. Because it does hold me accountable to always be looking for where God is working. And so I am actually writing more of them than I'm sending out.
mm,
Um, because I want to keep looking. But I think probably in every other week. And it's funny because it usually goes out on a Tuesday morning. On the Tuesday mornings where it's supposed to go out, usually, I'd be like, oh, I gotta check make sure it's all set. And now I'm like, oh, it's Tuesday. Did one come out today? I don't think so. I'll do one next week, maybe. Yeah, it's just
yeah.
different.
Very,
Um,
very relaxed.
yes, it's much
Yeah.
more relaxed. It's not like on the to-do list. If I
Mhm.
think of something that I really feel like this would be a really good one to share, then I, schedule it for whenever, and
Mhm.
then I don't have to worry about it and think about it anymore. And if another one comes up, then I put that one in and schedule it and.
Yeah. How are you treating social media? I don't think we
So
talked about that last time.
yeah, that one's an easy one for me to let go. I have been sharing the 28-day challenge because
Right.
it's collaborative, and I don't want to invite a bunch of authors in and say, let's do this together, and then leave them out to dry. So for that, I'm sharing each day, each author's different thing that comes out each day. Other than that, I don't know. I think I probably won't have any problem not touching it.
Okay.
Um, yeah, social media is not my
Well,
not
it's
my
interesting because
place.
John Mark Comer, I think that's how you say his last
Yeah,
name. I actually don't know how to say his last name, but he wrote,
the ruthless elimination of
Mission of
hurry.
Hurry, yes.
Yeah.
And, so what his book was one of the ones I read when I was first learning what is a Sabbath practice, what can I do with it?
Yeah.
Um, but he actually just released a new book. But for the last year, he's been on a sabbatical from social media and stuff. And so it's been really interesting to watch, like, all of a sudden he's back on social media promoting this new book. And so, but he's been like gone for a year.
Yeah.
Um, Occasionally, he would post things, but, if it was like a kinda like what you're talking about, like a collaborative thing that he had going on with somebody else, which I think is the honorable thing to do because, it's just like those people
They've
one of the
invested their time
they
and
have, they
yeah,
have. Yeah, exactly. And so you wanna be a good friend and
yeah.
good
Advocate
collaborator.
for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. But it's just so when you're like, "Oh, that was an easy one for me to let go," I'm like, I kinda get the same sense from him that that was an easy one for him to let go too.
Yeah. Like,
So
I
are
won't miss you, Instagram.
so are you, like, off of it for yourself too? Like, are you taking, like, a Sabbath year from it entirely or just from posting content that has to relate to your writing? Like, would you post something of, like, your family's up to or anything like that?
Maybe I don't do a lot of personal posting either.
Okay.
So, I mean, maybe I will if something super exciting happens and like we've got a vacation coming up. Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe.
Like,
Maybe,
even the
maybe not.
conference I went to, I didn't even post about the conference. I was
Yeah.
tagged a lot by friends and things like that and,
Oh, that's true.
commented on
Now that
those,
you
but
say that, I'm like,
I
"Oh, yeah, I
never
guess." Yeah.
never even posted about that. I didn't have thoughts I wanted to share. I don't know. 'Cause
Well, that makes
I
sense.
had a lot of thoughts, just not that I wanted to share.
So going into February, because that's where we're at,
Yeah.
we're in February, you're gonna
Yeah.
finish up the 28 days,
Yeah.
um,
That'll be the whole month.
how the for month. for February. Is there anything else that you're thinking is gonna kinda occupy your time in February? And even looking into
Yeah.
March, like where you're heading into March, do you kinda have an idea where you're headed with this?
Yeah, so I'm working with my church. They're having a women's retreat coming up. It's in April. And usually that's one of those things where it's like I would be too busy with other writing projects to be able to commit to anything kind of big like that. But I have joined the team for that. And so I'll be doing some writing for different lessons. They're doing it's on authentic identity. And so we'll have different kind of vignettes written from different women of the Bible's perspectives
Oh,
of
that's fun.
how God kind of defined their identity through different circumstances and changes that happened in their lives. So I'll be writing some of those and then the communion service. So I'm enjoying, still writing, still doing some projects. And of course, I had a book idea this morning. So I wrote all that down and I will happily jump on that in 2025. 2 months, two book ideas.
Oh my
Okay.
goodness.
We're just rolling right along.
Yeah.
And then my agent is talking about my next book proposal. So I don't know how much I'll work on that. I'm not going to schedule any time for it. If the ideas start to kind of come together on their own, then I'll put it in.
Mhm.
But I'm not going to sit down and like I'm going to pound out
Yeah.
this book proposal.
And for anybody
That's
who
not going to
hasn't
happen.
done a book proposal, you might not understand how intense they are. It's
Yeah.
like a 60-page document. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. And so it's not an easy feat. It definitely is a project. And you're writing it
Mm.
with the intent to get picked up by a publisher. You're writing it with the intent of making a profit off of it, having some kind of fruit come from it. So I see why you're kind of like wrestling with it a little bit
Yeah.
and not wanting to put too much attention towards it. So
Hmm.
that'll be interesting to follow up next month about and see kind of where you landed with that. So
Yeah. Still figuring it out. I feel like a lot of things this year are going to be figuring it out.
good. Well, I'm excited to see what happens this
Yeah.
month and with the challenge and then with your proposal possibly. We'll see what God has for you, what he asks you to lay down or pick up. So
All right. And I know you have big changes that you have put
yes,
into place coming
yes.
up with some projects. So, okay, update us on what projects you're working on and any big changes that you have made.
I always think I'm like, I hate when I change things. And I don't know if you feel like this at all, or if anybody else can relate to this, but I don't like to make changes because I feel like it makes me seem flaky. Like, as if like I'm going back on my word or something,
Yeah.
or like, "Oh, she can't ever commit to anything and get it done." That's really not true. Like, I get things done. But for some reason, whenever I have to change my plans, I get a little bit, like, angsty about it. And that happened this month. This month, I just goodness, January, I had all the hopes and dreams, so much optimism for January. And about the very first week, we had the flu hit our house. The second week, there was an ice storm that shut our entire city down. The third week, it was just a rough week. The third week. The fourth week was a little bit better, but it was still felt like I was moving through mud. And during that third and fourth week, I felt like the Lord was saying to me, you have a lot of big goals for this year, but they're not necessarily mine. You have limitations you're not acknowledging, and you have priorities that you're not paying attention to. And not that I wasn't taking care of my priorities, but just that I was kind of putting them lower than some other things. And so I kind of had to take a step back and go, okay, Lord, what what should this year actually look like? I have these big dreams, these big plans. Um, and I do feel like you're calling me to like grow and to scale and all these things. And he reminds me, he's like, I didn't ask you to grow, I asked you to go deep. And I was like, what does that mean exactly? What does that mean to go deep? And just started digging into scripture and whatnot. And he was bringing things back to my recall and realized that to go deep, like to have a good foundation, you have to go deep into the ground. A big, huge oak tree that is gorgeous and flourishing, the roots are deep down into the soil and spread out, you know, and a foundation of a house, it goes down deep, right? And so this idea of foundation, of base, of roots, that was all coming up. And I realized that, not that I misheard the Lord, but just that I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit with what I heard. And so I know that this is a growing, like a, rather than a Sabbath year where I felt like I'm supposed to pull back, I felt like this year I was supposed to kind of push forward. And I realized that that meant fixing all the things I had missed the first time around. Because in the development of content, like to develop content takes so much energy and so much focus and creativity in this one particular area. And when you are a one person show and you're trying to do all these things, the little nuanced stuff that you're not so great at just like falls to the wayside. But those are the things that allow for your business to grow. And so little things like, SEO optimization on your website. And those are just silly little things, and they're very tedious and I don't know them very well. And so I just kind of ignored them a little bit.
Me
So like,
too.
so like little things, like most people don't know this, but every photo that goes on your website, there is an ability on the back end of your back end of your website. There's an ability to title that photo and add a description. And when Google crawls the internet, it's looking at that information on those photos just as much as it's looking at anything else on your website. So even something as simple as updating the description, I have always just uploaded the photos into my WordPress site and just added them into my website. And I'm like, I'll go back and I'll change all that. So if you like hover over my photos on my site, they have like wonky namings, right? Because I just didn't care. And so it's such a little thing, but the Lord was just convicting me that there's a lot of little things like that, that in the grand scheme, they don't seem like when you're in the middle of trying to like get a book done, they don't seem like a big deal, but they're really the basis for your business being able to grow big and scale. And it's the basis for things working for you, like making sure that your mailing list is segmented properly so that people aren't getting emails from you that they don't want. And then you don't get unsubscribed, which means you don't get hit with, um, just whatever. Like there's just so many little things. And I think that we go into this business knowing how to do one thing. We know how to write, right? And we're like, I just need to write the thing and then I just need to deliver it to the people. And that's all I need to worry about. But really, if we're going to develop a true writing business that is profitable, that is impacting, and we're not just spinning our wheels and it's not just being a hobby business, we have to have those really dialed in, those things like funnels dialed in, lead magnets dialed in. Like I have for one of my things for simplysabbath.com, I have a lead magnet there and I have a follow-up sequence. And like, that's great. I don't have that for any of my other stuff. And so I have all these opportunities where I could have followed up with people after they downloaded a lead magnet and I never have. And that's not doing good business. And so, um, that's what I was convicted about. That's what I was realizing I need to take the majority of my time, especially in this first half of the year, is to fix the foundation of each of the different. I have two businesses. So for the homeschool directive business, we are growing, we are scaling up, we are getting bigger. It's a blessing, but I need to make sure those foundational pieces are in play so that we can sustain that growth. For my writing business, I know now where it's going in a few years, and I need to make sure that that foundation's there so that it can handle where it's going to go. And so it's almost like the Lord was like, I want you to go deep with scaling in mind. And so I do believe that this is a year for me to release my first novel, but I realized it was not the year for me to release two novels. So with a poetry book too. So I took the second one. I took the second one off. It was going to release in September. I took that and moved that to February. So anybody who's listening, you're getting a preview. what's coming. You don't really know, but you know now. So that's moving to February, and then I moved the one that I was going to release in May. I moved that to September, and I moved it to recognizing because I had started to spend some time. I'm like, all right, I have this novel. I wrote it 15 years ago. I revised it like 6 years ago. It is good. I love the story. It's ready, Lord. You were telling me all last year I was supposed to be publishing it. I'm ready to publish it. So I know it's got some I know it's got some areas that needs to improve because I've improved as a writer. So I know. So I like sat down with it and the Lord was like, nope. Everything you thought about this book is not what it's going to be when you release it. And I'm like, no,
Why?
and yeah, it's right. And he's like, because you've matured and I have a message for you to share through it. And you only knew part of the message when I gave it to you originally. And so it was really funny because I actually pulled up the original draft from 15 years ago and I was like, oh my gosh, this book is so not anywhere near this original. When it originally started, it was like a fantasy, like full on fantasy novel. And now it's like a contemporary. Literary fiction. It's so
There you
funny.
go.
It's episodic. It is yeah. Anyway, so it's just interesting to see, but I saw, like, the main point of it 15 years ago, and even with the revisions that happened, um, 6 years ago, I felt like God was coming from Romans chapter 1 and 2 for me with that book, and when I revisited, he's like, "Look at this. It's actually Romans chapter 1 and 2. It's the 10 Commandments. It's the Sermon on the Mount. It's Colossians and Ephesians. This is my message. This is what it's all about." And I'm like, okay. So I did a lot of post-it notes and realized it was, um, there's a beautiful story there. And I realized that if I rushed through it and tried to get it done so that it could be released in May, I would not be stewarding that message well. And so it all goes back to that foundation, that base of it, and saying, "All right, Lord, I'm going to trust you with this because what I was hoping for is not what you're asking me to do." And I feel like a failure in that. I feel like I'm a little bit of a fraud in that, or imposter, or whatever labels I might put on myself. But you're not putting those labels on me. The only label you're asking me to have is obedient.
Mm.
And so I have to do that, have to embrace that label, not any of the other ones. And so kind of where I find myself this month is I spent some time reworking some schedules, reworking some content calendars, reworking deadlines, and feeling really not confident, but just I guess maybe confident. I'm just feeling at peace. That's what it is. I'm just feeling at peace about it and just kind of holding it, my hands out to the Lord and kind of keeping them open and being like, all right, this is where we're headed right now. If I'm veering off track, just push me back on course, you know? So that's
Yeah.
kind of where I'm at.
I love that. Okay, I love many things about that. First, I love that the only label we have to have is obedience. Because I think so often what God asks us to do is unconventional. It's inconvenient. It
So true.
is, um, it does, uh, not attack, but it counters what we want to do for ourselves,
Hmm.
especially in, like you were saying, you don't want to be flaky. Like we don't want other people to think that we don't have it all together, right? Even though we
Yep.
don't have it all together.
So
And
true.
I think we're kind of the same in like, we don't care too much about how people think about us on the outside. Like, we got the curly hair that goes crazy and does what it wants. We dress
Mhm.
the way we dress. We're not into fashion and makeup and all this stuff. And
Right.
so I think a lot of times we think, well, we don't care about really what people think of us. But that is not true because we
So
have a
true.
very curated inside. We have a certain way we want people to think about our identity and who we
Hmm.
are. And we want to control their perception of our abilities, right?
Yeah.
Um, and all of that is countered when God enters the picture because his purpose is to bring himself glory and not us
Hmm.
glory. And so,
You're
yeah,
right.
that obedience label, when we take that on a lot of times, it challenges all of that in a good
Very
way,
much.
though.
Yeah.
In a good way, because it does bring peace, that peace that we wouldn't have otherwise when we're just trying to do it in our own strength.
Mhm.
Um, Okay, and I also love the direction your book is going. I can't wait to read it. I am personally very upset that it is backed up until September because I really want to read this book. But I also want to read it even more now, knowing just the process that he's taking you through to get
Mhm,
it into the shape that it needs to be. Because that idea of the oak tree, I love that because you're not growing wheat that
mm,
springs up in one season, we chop it down, we eat it, and we do it again. That
mhm.
is not the life that he has called us to. He calls us oaks of righteousness planted with deep roots by streams of living water. This is a different picture of what he has for us. And we can make wheat all day, right?
Mhm.
But that is not his calling for us.
True.
So I'm so excited by your obedience
Oh, thank you.
and by what this project is going to be. Um, and it makes me think too of the verse that says, if we're faithful in the little things, then he'll put us in charge of bigger things and we'll be faithful in bigger things. So I
Yeah,
love just your humility in approaching those little things like
yeah.
SEO and all that. It is so tedious.
It is so tedious.
And to be obedient
Like
in
the
that
bane of my
is
existence.
yes. We want to be obedient in the big things, right?
Yeah.
We want big projects. We want fun things. And we have to
Put me in
start
front of a computer to write a novel any day. I'll take that.
right.
I'll take that.
There you go.
Make me write an email sequence and it makes me twitch.
Yep. Yep. But if we're faithful in SEO,
Yeah.
then maybe we will be faithful in those big projects as
Yeah.
well.
Well, and I think there's something, the Bible often talks about, like, I was wrestling with this the other day about not being anxious, because like Jesus talks about this in the Sermon on the Mount, about how God takes care of the animals and like, don't worry about things. And I really do believe that those verses are focused more on the attitude of dependence on the Lord, right? Like, don't be anxious. Don't let anxiety be on the throne of your life. Let the Lord be on the throne of your life, right? Because we can also look at different places throughout all of scripture that talks about being wise and to make sure that things are, that you're doing business diligently, that you are stewarding things well and you're not being, afraid and just kind of like retreating um, to take the talents that God's given you and invest them wisely. And so if we're not doing those little things as much, which is, I hate doing them, then we're not really being wise. I mean, we can look around and there are people who have accomplished things and they know how this works. And they're saying, these are the things you kind of have to pay attention to. And if we just dismiss them, then we are not taking advantage of all the resources that God has given us, right? To be wise and to learn from people who have been before. I mean, there's something about wisdom from people who have already been through experiences and they have already cultivated the thing that you're trying to cultivate. And to be able to look at them. I mean, in Proverbs, wisdom is kind of put into this persona of like a person almost, right? And there it's an elevated place of respect that the book of Proverbs gives to wisdom. And so I don't ever want to just I think there's a tension that we hold between trusting God to fully bring about his provision, um, trusting in his faithful character, but also not slacking on taking advantage of resources, on learning from others who are wiser than us, and from trying to steward things well, right?
Yeah.
And so it's definitely a tension. It's definitely a wrestling between the two, but I don't think it needs to be either or. Like sometimes I hear, especially in the industry we're in, this idea of like, well, if it's going to be, it's going to be, and God's going to make it happen. And it's like, well, yes, but God also asks us to do our best. He asks us to
Yeah.
bring what we can, to not just squander the talents He's given us, to not just squander the opportunities and the resources He's given us. And so it can be a both and, right?
Yeah.
Like it's both doing the thing that you have been called to do, being obedient, but also trusting God. I mean, God didn't just say, okay, Moses, just, you know, I'll make it happen. I'll deliver. But he said, go to Pharaoh and talk. Like
Yeah.
you have to go to Pharaoh and you have to tell him to let my people go, and I will deliver you all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a both and. And I think this goes back to something I meant to touch on when you were first talking. And I think this would probably be a really great place for us to end. Um, you were talking about your writing relationship with the Lord. like where he wakes you up and you write together. And it reminded me, um, in the church we visited, the pastor actually preached from Exodus, I think it was chapter 6. A very weird chapter, but in it, Aaron and Moses are like, we're not so sure we're the best people for the job. And Moses is like, I definitely like they wouldn't listen to me before. Why do you think they're gonna listen to me now? And then there is a genealogy, and then it's a repeat of Moses saying, I don't know that I'm the right person for the job. And the pastor is pointing out how odd it is that this genealogy is like smack dab in the middle of these two verses. And it's actually a literary device that Hebrews use, like it's in Hebrew literature, where the beginning and the end are repeated, and the middle is the important part. And his point with this is that all these names had a couple of different reasons why they were included. One, um, it was to show God's faithfulness. He had told, I forget who it is, that his family would be in Egypt. It probably would have been Jacob, right? His family would be in Egypt for 4 generations, and then they would come be brought out of Egypt. And so when you're looking at that genealogy, you can see it's been 4 generations. So it's like a reminder. God is faithful to his promises. And then it's a list of how these are all flawed people that are listed. Not a single one of them is perfect, right? And all their kind of faults are kind of mentioned in that. And so that was important, that God uses flawed people. He uses people who have weaknesses, people who struggle to trust him, people who struggle to not put too much stuff on their plate, people who struggle with people's opinion of them. He uses our weakness to so that he can be glorified, right? That through our weaknesses he's glorified. And then he pointed out that there are people whose names are named. And that all these names are important because God works with people. God desires relationship. He desires to work through people and with people. And that's like the very reason why he created Adam is to have a person that would reflect his image and steward his creation with him. And so God is always in the business of being in business with people, right? And so he always is looking to partner with us, to have a relationship with us in stewarding the things that he's given to us. And so that relationship, the fact that we create from rest, not because it's going to help us do better because our bodies are rested or our minds are rested. We create from rest because it reminds us that we are in relationship with a God who is faithful to his promises and always sustaining us, providing for us, and leading us. And so I think I know I, for one, am trying to remember that as I go throughout this year. And I think you are too, um, in all of that. So do you have any last words as we wrap up this episode?
Well, I was going to share a scripture that I
Yes,
was
please
reading
do.
this morning that, like, basically is exactly what you just said.
Oh, please
Um,
read it then.
so this is the Passion Translation. It's Corinthians 4, 5 through, it's probably 7. It says, "You see, we don't go around preaching about ourselves. We preach that Jesus Christ is Lord, and we ourselves are servants for his sake. For God, who said, 'Let there be light,' in the darkness, has made this light shine in our hearts so that we could know the glory of God that is seen in the face of Jesus Christ. Now we have this light shining in our hearts, but we ourselves are like fragile clay jars containing this great treasure. This makes it clear that our great power is from God, not from ourselves."
That's
And
oh, I
wow.
love that. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
It's
sums it
like
up
we
right
know
there.
this power doesn't come from us. We're just these like brittle clay things that hold eternity. And
Mhm.
gosh, what a wonder
Yeah,
that he chooses to work with us.
I know. It's such a privilege,
Mm,
such a responsibility.
yeah.
And so, how beautiful it is. That is for sure. Well, Erin, I think we are going to wrap up our conversation for today. But I appreciate you just being so open and honest with us and for even wanting to do this with me. I'm excited to see what God does throughout the year and that
Yeah.
we get to document it along the way.
Yes. Well,
So,
I'm honored that we can keep each other accountable because
yes,
yeah, it's nice to process out loud sometimes. And
so true.
and be honest.
All right. Well, next month we'll check in with you guys on how this grading from Rest is going. Talk to you later. Bye.